Hey everybody, and welcome to this guide for Darkest Dungeon 2. My name is Britishbrat, and in this video we're going to cover my top do's and do-nots of team building in this awesome game. Now, if you enjoy this kind of content and you'd like to see more of it, then make sure to subscribe. I love to cover all things Darkest Dungeon, whether it's Let's Plays or updates or whatever it is, so you're in the right place if you like this kind of content. Well, first of all, let's go ahead and cover a few of the things that I would not do when it comes to team building in Darkest Dungeon 2. So, these are mistakes I tend to see a lot of newer players make when they first get to the crossroads. So, first of all, don't limit yourself to a single team comp or skill set on a hero. While it may feel like the best way to get unlocks early on and really kind of power through all that stuff, limiting yourself to a single team will actually slow you down and how fast you learn the game's mechanics overall. Darkest Dungeon 2, like Darkest Dungeon 1, is all about understanding the systems of the game and how best to deal with them. Trying out all the different heroes, plus the different varied skills on each hero, is really going to be the best way to teach yourself all of the myriad different ways that you can play the game, and also how best to deal with all of the threats that you're going to have thrown at you throughout the course of a run. If you continue to limit yourself and your team selection to the heroes you think are going to be best, I promise you that you're probably going to find yourself hitting a roadblock at some point and unable to get past it because you don't really have anything to adapt to. This also really just lets you kind of get the chance to find what heroes really are your favorite and which play styles you enjoy the most. So try all of the different things out. They're all good for you. Moving on, the second do not that I would say is never adapting a team to the scenario that you're dealing with. Like I said, Darkest Dungeon 2 has a lot of different threats that you're going to face over the course of a run. And something I see many players doing through a run is building a team with only the one final boss or maybe a lair boss that they're really trying to gun for in mind. They'll build the perfect team to take that on, and then they kind of tunnel vision themselves into only using that team. They won't do anything else, and they won't switch up how that team works, and they'll only use it in the way they have it planned for that one fight. Remember, you'll have to deal with enemies from multiple different regions, each with different threats, and you'll also have to adapt to the different selections of items, trinkets, and loot that you generally roll across a run and what you generate based on the choices that you make. So this means that you need to be able to adapt on the fly to what's going on. You gotta try and keep in mind the different ways that you can shift your team around to suit the problems you're facing in the now, and not just the boss fight that you're going to be dealing with at the end of the road. You really can't beat that boss if you end up dying at a random, road encounter halfway through your run. So always try to keep that adaptability in mind. Next, number 3 on the things that I would not do when it comes to building a team in this game is not planning for the loss of a hero during the course of a run. Now look, I know I'm an amazing gamer, I know you're probably the best gamer in the world as well, but if you've played this game for any length of time and you know that a hero dying is more of a when than it really is an if. So, if it's going to happen eventually, and this event just generally tends to make many players quit in frustration, you really should kind of adapt and think about this before it happens. A lot of players quit not just out of rage, but really because they're not aware of how to restructure the team that they have. They had one idea, they never really thought about any other ideas, and so that really just makes them kind of quit. They're like, I don't even know what to do, even when I make it. If you make it to the next inn, they just don't know what to do. So it's always a good idea when you're at the crossroads, just take a look at all of the heroes. Like, go through each and every single one of them, even if they're not one of the heroes that you're taking, because the ones that you're not taking, they're going to have those same quirks and other things like diseases if they're memoried when you take them at the inn. So it's always good to keep that in mind. You can check that at the inn, but just always remember, hey, if my Hellion dies, there was that flag that looked pretty interesting. Maybe I'll take him instead, so that way you always have a plan B, and when you do lose a hero, then you don't feel as bad and you feel prepared for it. So having even that most basic of backup plans will really help you keep a level head when you lose somebody, and you won't just abandon the run then and there. So I think that's always a really good thing to start planning with. So that's going to really cover the things that I would not do during the course of a run. There are a lot of more things, but when it comes to team building, I think those cover some of the biggest ones mistakes that I see a lot of new players make. But now we're going to move on to the next part, the more fun part. And let's talk about some of the things that you should do when you're trying to build a team at the crossroads. So we've kind of touched on this one already, but my first one is going to be double checking each and every hero for their quirks, and if they're memoried, making sure that you take a look to see if they have anything really good, which you probably remember, or especially if they have something really bad, like a disease or a seriously nasty negative quirk. I cannot tell you how many runs I've had where I won the run, right? But at the end of the run, we hit death's door or something like that, and I ended up rolling like Shattered Will or, you know, something else really negative at the end, and I didn't really remember that until I get to the crossroads, and I just kind of ignore it, and then I get to, you know, my first fight, and I realize that I'm generating negative tokens or something. Like, where is this coming from? Well, it's because I didn't check my quirks at the end. So always make sure that you're double checking those. Checking all of your heroes also means that you keep your options open and can make sure you build a team, the best team possible, right? A lot of times, as we talked about before, limiting yourself may not be the best way to learn or even the best way to ensure a victory. I see a lot of players who miss out on a much better choice of hero with a great quirk, you know, maybe like a Jinx Man-at-Arms or something, because they had a really specific team in mind and they just throw those 4 heroes in and they don't really take the time to look at the other heroes. This also ties into just making sure you're prepared for what hero you might want to select when you're done, or a hero dies, I should say. Now, with the new version of the candles, you can re-roll quirks, so this isn't as important a thing per se. I mean, it's still good to check, but you can kind of try to force a much better quirk, but it is very expensive, right? I mean, early on, a lot of us have a lot of candles stored up, but over time, you're going to lose that storage of candles, and re-rolling quirks is going to become very expensive. So sometimes it's just cheaper to just take a different hero that has a better quirk than it is to go for the hero that you really want, but you might have to re-roll 3 or 4 times to get rid of hypochondria, and then they roll, you know, something else really bad, and you're like, I really need something good here. So just keep that in mind. You know, don't limit yourself that way. So moving on to the next do, number 2, re-rolling memoried heroes is not a bad thing. There's a big kind of idea, I think, that once you have a memoried hero, like, you can't let anything happen to them, right? The big thing, don't let them die, but re-rolling them is a valid option. This one might sound a bit silly, but sometimes the quirks and the diseases, like we talked about earlier, that they accumulate over the course of a run or multiple runs just end up making them a really bad hero to take. You might get lucky and find a hospital early on. You might get lucky and maybe if you rolled, you know, a Skull Tea or Meditative Totem at the altar, maybe you can get rid of a few of those quirks. So that's always something to keep in mind as well. But generally speaking, you know, if you've really got like, I need this leper, like, I know I could take somebody else, but this is like the team I'm really going for, but this leper has, you know, just the yips and Shattered Will and just something else really bad. It can just, you know, head in the sand and they're just double blind all the time or whatever the case is. Maybe it's best to just re-roll them, because getting a hero that has Shattered Will and Brittle Bones and stuff memoried in, sometimes it's just not worth it, even if they have 3 or 4 memories on them. Favorite toy is not always worth it. And this also lets you re-roll their quirks more. So once you re-roll their memory, you then have the ability to re-roll their quirks if you want to with candles. And really, to me, this just ties into how it is in DD1, where just sometimes you have to cut the dead weight, right? Sometimes you have to lose and dismiss a hero that you've invested some time, effort, and energy into. It feels bad, but it can sometimes be the best thing for your team. So, you know, there's always that. All right, so to the next item, we have number 3 when it comes to the do's, and this is to consider the big 4, as I call it, when it comes to the balance of your team. Balance being one of the most important things. So when I talk about the big 4, for me, these 4 things are damage given, damage mitigation, stress, and healing. I think these 4 aspects make up the overall basis for how good your team will be able to handle the very different scenarios they're bound to encounter through the course of a run. So I'm going to break down what each of these mean. Of course, this isn't all-encompassing of everything, but we're generalizing here, and I think this covers most of it. So damage given simply means that the DPS you can put out is whatever it is, right? How fast can the team kill the enemy? this applies not just to the raw damage, which is the obvious one, but also applies to your team's ability to generate strength tokens and vulnerable tokens, because those also amplify how much damage that you can do. So those are all things you need to keep in mind as far as your DPS ability. Now, damage mitigation refers to how much damage your team can actually stop or take. This comes in a lot of different forms as well. Obviously, just raw health is one of these things. Like if you just have a super tanky hero, they can just take a lot of damage as it is. But other things that are going to be important here are going to be like block generation, weakness token generation, and even stunning is considered damage mitigation in my eyes, because it's removing a turn from an enemy so they can't deal that damage to your team. The next one is stress, and this of course refers to your ability to either ignore or remove stress from your team. This can apply to abilities that straight up remove the stress, and also things that give your heroes like stress resistance or a passive removal, such as with Quirks and Memories. And I'm discluding items here because when it comes to team building, generally you're not going to have more than a couple items. If you roll a few at the altar, you don't have any control over those. It's good to keep those in mind, but we're just talking about like the things you're going to find at the crossroad. And then finally, there's the healing aspect. This is probably the easiest one to understand, the most obvious one, but it comes in the form of your team's ability to repair the damage that's dealt to them, either by healing, removing dots, applying regen, whatever it might be. Those are all different ways that you can not mitigate the damage, but fix the damage that you didn't mitigate. So I think those 4 things apply to every team that you build. Now, that doesn't mean that every team needs all 4 of those things in equal balance. I'm not trying to say you have to like put all the bars to the same amount. In fact, having a lot of one aspect can make your team make up for a deficit in others. An obvious example being a team that deals a huge amount of damage when it comes to the damage given will probably be okay with having lower healing, because they're able to kill the enemy so fast that the enemy actually can't do damage to you anyway. So maybe you don't have great damage mitigation and healing, but if you're killing 2-3 enemies in round 1 pretty consistently, then you're probably going to be fine for the majority of the run, right? A team with very high crit, for example, can effectively counter stress because they're always stress healing based on the fact that they're critting like every turn, especially if they have like AoE stress, you know? So there's different, like, you know, when you go up on one, maybe you actually are going up on another, even though it doesn't really seem like it is. But keeping those 4 things in mind, personally, in my mind, will make it much easier to kind of theory craft a team. Those are generally the 4 things that I kind of think of when I put a team together. I go, okay, how much damage am I doing? How much damage can I take? How am I dealing with the stress? And how am I dealing with the healing? Like I said, there are, of course, a lot of different things that you need to keep in mind on top of that, but that's the basic, right? It also is good to keep in mind what we said before about adapting on the fly, right? You may build a team initially with one kind of like, 10 damage mitigation, 5 damage dealing, 6, whatever. You want to put stats to it. But you might find that your team is starting to lag. You might kind of get through the course of a run and you notice that you had a particularly bad fight. You've got a lot of stress. Your team doesn't have a lot of stress healing built in, at least with its current set of skills. So you could actually maybe swap out your skills between fights and maybe use a fight to kind of stall, get some stress healing in. Maybe you try to hoard certain items. Like if you know your team has low healing, you might want to go for a stagecoach build that helps you generate healing items more effectively, right? So that way you have combat items that can help you deal with that. So it's all about finding that balance and finding that way to kind of catch up from how you fell behind or lagged in one of those different ways. I think really those 4 things, like I said, encompass the large majority of the balance that you're looking for. There are obviously different things, but and that brings me to the final thing that I want to talk about, and that big thing is that when I want you to consider when you're putting your team together, that big thing is make something that you will enjoy. I know that that's a cheesy answer, like have fun, but it does hold especially true in a game like Darkest Dungeon 2, where it is a game that is about beating you down and it's about making you like redo it and like die and just struggle, and it's hard and it's difficult. I really cannot tell you how many new players I find struggling because they come in, they say, I'm playing this meta build and everybody told me like this is the team, but I just can't get the win and I'm not having fun. And really the best thing I can say to that is just then just throw a team together that sounds fun. Maybe you don't win, but you might learn something. And I think that's probably, like I said at the very beginning, one of the most important things is just learning things as you go. Trust me, you'll get so much more from the game if you let yourself try out the wacky and weird ideas you've been brewing up in your head. And like I said, they might not always pan out, but you'll learn a new mechanic or you'll find a new interaction that will lead you to building an even better team and a crazier comp next time. And at the end of the day, this is a game about playing it multiple times. You're going to want to do things that help you just continue to play it. So if that means just playing fun teams, not meta teams, then disregard everything I just told you before and have fun. At the end of the day, that's really what matters. But yeah, so that really covers my thoughts on the best do's and do nots for team building in this game, Darkest Dungeon 2. If you have some ideas of things that you think would help new players or old players alike, and some ideas for what you do when you build a team, strategies that you have, or whatever the case may be, go ahead, leave them down in the comments. I'd love to see your thoughts on it. And yeah, I appreciate you watching the video. I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye-bye.